I'd like to move on now to the big story of last year. This was on August 9, 2014, a white police officer killed an 18-year-old unarmed African American named Michael Brown. His body was left on a street in Ferguson, Missouri for more than 4 hours. During that time, crowds gathered and tweeted out their anger. Members of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch photography staff responded quickly. They covered the story from August 9 to November when the grand jury decided not to indict Darrell Wilson, the police officer who shot Michael Brown. I'd like to show you those pictures.
21, put me on Canfield. What's your seminar car? 25, I'm several more units over here. There's going to be a problem.
They're requesting more units at Canfield and Copper Creek. I'll also contact St. Louis County PD. 25, I have 2 country club units coming your way and possibly St. Louis
We're going to
County.
need crowd control here. I'm clear.
I'm
We just need
contacting
crowd
St. Louis
control.
County.
Until we start taking what's yours, you never see him again.
St. Louis Police Department, please return to your home.
We live here!
They started throwing tear gas and shooting rubber bullets at all the protesters, telling us to go home, and we live here. They need to go home. We live here. We looking for justice. Where's the justice for this boy's death? That's all we asking for. Why are they shooting at us in our own neighborhood?
Our streets! 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 Our streets!
Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up!
Don't shoot!
Hands up!
Don't shoot!
Hands up!
Don't shoot!
Hands up!
Don't shoot!
Hands up!
Don't shoot!
Hands up!
Don't shoot!
Which side are you on, friend? Which side are you on? Justice for Mike Brown is justice for us all. Justice for Mike Brown is justice for
This is a crowd for help in St. Louis. That's all it is. My dad was a cop. I don't condone violence. And it's sad to say all the testimony that was in this case, they just overlooked that. That's just the way I feel. You know what I'm saying? For him to not get indicted on nothing, no reckless homicide, no involuntary manslaughter, anything like that, that's absurd. That's just absurd to me.
What you gonna do? What you gonna do about me? Yes. What you gonna do?
Go ahead!
What you gonna do about me? Oh, you used to bury me way underground.
David and Robert, I'd like to, first of all, congratulations to you and your team. I'd like you to talk about some of these pictures, if you may. I'll flash some of them, like this one. Tell us where this was and what happened here.
This is Ed Crawford, and he goes by name Skeeta. And this was, it's kind of a long story. I'll try to do a short version of it, but this was the 3rd night of the protest. We'd had 2 nights of tear gassing, and we felt that on this night we were actually going to have a peaceful night. And after some time, the peace broke. And I just happened to be on the street following a group of trucks out of the area, and police were starting to fire the tear gas to clear the street to get to another scene. And I just saw this man come out of the cloud and grab the tear gas canister and throw it back toward police. And at the time, I didn't know, I didn't notice what he was wearing, which has resonated with so many people. But it was very late. I missed deadline on this picture, and I didn't really appreciate what it meant to so many people until the next morning. This was shot after midnight, missed the deadline. I finally got home, went to bed like David and I and the rest of our staff did. Our normal routine was to get home at 2 or 3 in the morning and be a little amped up on adrenaline still and be online for a while longer and go to bed. On this particular night, I got home and I was exhausted and just went straight to bed, got my kids up the next morning for school, got them off to school, and came home and checked in on my Twitter feed to see if anything was going on, and I just couldn't believe the reaction to this picture was just astounding. And
What was the reaction?
from the protester end of things, I mean, people see Ed as a hero.
Yeah.
Now, Ed was arrested right after the photograph was taken. Strangely, I was so tight, knowing I was so tight on deadline, I didn't photograph him being arrested. I didn't even know he was arrested. Very shortly after taking the photograph, I ran back to my car to send the picture downtown, and so he has a court case now, and as many protesters that were arrested do, and the picture has a little life of its own, though. It's still, people are still talking about it.
There are people who have gotten tattoos of Robert's photos. Robert's photos have been, this particular photo has been painted on the side of buildings.
Yeah.
We police the use of our images pretty strongly, but we've totally lost control of this image.
You didn't claim copyright on this one?
Well, it is copyrighted, but we just can't enforce it. It's kind of a legend now.
It's sort of the iconic photo of that.
It's very strange
yeah.
to see, within about 48 hours, people were on the streets of West Florissant Avenue in the middle of Ferguson selling T-shirts of this image. Whether it be, some of them were just straight rip-offs of the photo, some of them were artist renderings, but it was out there very quickly. The first time I actually saw it was I was at the Mike Brown Memorial and just photographing what was going on at the memorial at that time, and this was less than 36 hours after.
Wow.
And a man's at the memorial, and he's got the shirt, and it's like, okay.
It was also interesting about this photograph, too, because some people said that he was throwing a Molotov cocktail at police, and so the way people would view this photograph, they would bring their own views and
Right.
preconceptions to this photograph, because when this photograph was being shared, a lot of times it's being shared without the context of the caption, and that was one of the things we really had to fight in Ferguson, was to provide context and to the events that were going on, and truth to what was going on, because there was a lot of misinformation that was going around on social media about what was happening. So.
Let's do another picture. This one.
This is a photo that
I'm worried for the photographer who must have been at the other end of this.
Well, yes. These are actually separate nights, but this was a photograph I shot more than a week into the protests, and my photo editor, Lyndon Steele, and I had been talking 2 days before this, and I said, we were both like, well, what aren't we showing? And we were like, well, wouldn't it be great if we could get in and show what the police are experiencing? Because right now we'd spent nights and nights and nights just photographing things from the protester side of the story, and I had done a lot of police ride-alongs over the years, and I had some contacts at the police department, so I called them up and I said, hey, any chance you guys let me ride in with the TAC team? And I was thinking that this was going to be a huge no, and they're like, yeah, I think we can make that happen. And I'm like, wow, all right. And so we had a false start with this where we tried to go in one night, and they told me to arrive there by 7 o'clock, and that wouldn't be a problem at all. And at like 5 o'clock, they had gone out and started tear gassing everybody. So I said, well, what about tomorrow night? Can we go tomorrow night? So we kind of stuck with it. We got embedded in the next night then. And I think for me, this photograph, This is another photograph which people bring their own views and prejudice to. In this particular case, we had strapped a GoPro video camera to my helmet to show the experience of what it was like. And 30 seconds before this photograph was made, the police came under fire. There was 3 very close gunshots fired in their direction, and that's when they responded with tear gas. Some people see this and they think, this symbolizes, police militarization, and then other police officers see this and they see this they're like, yeah, I was sitting in the back of the tactical vehicle, and we had been moving photos throughout the night back to the paper, and my editor first received this photograph, and he goes, "Oh my God, I don't know if we can use this. It looks like a video game." And I was like, "That's the reality out here. We have to use this." And the editor sent me back a copy of the front page, and I was like, "Oh boy." I didn't know what these guys were going to think of it, how you're portraying them, and the police officers loved this picture. But protesters also love this picture, so I think that people bring their own views to the photographs.
Did we have a third photograph you wanted to look at? This one?
Do we have a third
Yes,
photograph?
the looting photograph.
This is from the first night of the riots, and this is the looting in the Quick Trip store. Robert and I had actually arrived at this very close to the scene, very close in time to each other, probably about 30 seconds apart. I had decided, I was like, well, I was kind of standing across the street. It's like, I need to get closer to this. I need to go into, you need to go into the Quick Trip. And if you were standing next to me out on the street, you would have thought I was a crazy person, because I was talking out loud to myself, trying to psych myself up to do this. It was not my wisest personal safety decision ever. But I went and I stood outside the Quick Trip for a couple of minutes, and I was, throughout all this, you built relationships very quickly with people. You talked with them. I was outside there for about 2 minutes, and I was talking to this guy, and I said, "Hey, can you watch my back as I go in?" And I followed this guy into the Quick Trip, and he was looting. And I went around the corner, and there was a 16-year-old kid there stealing some Pepsi, because that's what you steal when you're 16, I guess. And this guy came up behind me. He goes, "Hey, what are you doing?" And he lifts his white shirt, and he shows me the gun in his waistband. And I'm like, I'm a photographer for the Post-Dispatch. I'm making pictures. And he kind of looks at me and leans in a little bit. And I said, your face is covered. No one will know who you are. You'll be fine." And he goes, "Okay." And he goes back to looting the store. And that is now I make this picture of him. Now I decide, after he's threatened me with a gun, that now's a good time to make this gentleman's picture. I was inside the Quick Trip for less than 2 minutes. I went in, and I got out very quickly. To give you some perspective of how nervous I was when I was in there, it's a pretty simple function to shoot a video on an iPhone, right? Just kind of touch the button. I was sweating so much and shaking so much when I was in the Quick Trip. I was unsuccessful in my attempts to shoot iPhone video when I was in there. I have this great video of me thinking I'm ending a video, going, it goes dink, and then you can see it get put into my pocket.
So you had a camera and an iPhone.
Yeah, we're all multimedia journalists
And
now.
you have one camera in one hand and an iPhone in the other?
I put the cameras on my shoulder, and when I took out the iPhone, I was trying to do that. But, at the Post-Dispatch, we've always made a big push for multimedia, and I'm kind of a tech geek, so I always try to get some video if I think something's worthwhile was there. So I made an attempt at getting some video here.
So since you brought up these issues, there are many logistical challenges to covering an event like this. One is you're totally unprepared, and two is the safety. I mean, how many photographers did you send out on the field, and how did you ensure that they were safe?
Well, ensure that they're safe is dicey. We have a very small area in our newsroom called they call it the war closet. It's tactical equipment that was used when we embedded reporters in Iraq and Afghanistan. And David stopped that first night and took several things out of there and brought them out. And so, you know, once we started using the gear, I mean, you weren't out on the streets unless you had a vest and a helmet available.
So everyone was required to wear a vest and a helmet?
Yes. I mean,
automatically showing that you're
Well, we would try to conceal the vest as much as possible, because people would want the vests.
Right.
For their own protection.
Yeah, and so it's dicey, because, you know, you're out in the middle of summer, and you're walking around with a coat on because you got your vest underneath, but you know, several nights where, you know, we witnessed, we didn't just hear, we witnessed live gunfire back and forth, and so you had to have some level of protection, but a lot of us are learning on the fly. I mean, I've never been to Iraq or Afghanistan. I've never been in an active war zone, and so a lot of us learned on the fly. In between, one of the things we did do is in between the August 9th unrest and the November 24th grand jury announcement is our newspaper spent a lot of money on new gear, and we bought, you know, we have like a Macy's little section of bulletproof vests now, and you know, we have a lot more things, as well as we brought in a SWAT officer with City of St. Louis to give us some instructions on how to properly use some of the equipment, a little first aid training.
So you got your training while all of these events were already happening?
Yeah, our training came far after.
Came about 80% of the way through.
Yeah.
I had had some previous training from my time in Iraq and Afghanistan with hostile environment training, and I tried to share little gems about like how to put your gas mask on very quickly and how to pre-stage it and stuff.
I failed that test. I never wore it.
Yeah.
I'm sure we'll have questions about safety later, but one question I really wanted to ask is, how was your coverage, being the local paper, different from the way Ferguson was covered by people from the outside?
We know the residents, and you know, my first story in Ferguson was in 2001, and I spent a lot of time in Ferguson following a first-time political candidate. I'd never been to Ferguson before. I didn't come to the paper till '99, but those couple of months being in Ferguson, I met a lot of people, and it's not so much that I met the same people at the protest, but I knew the area very well, and I did know some people, and so, you know, we you know, these are our neighbors, and you know, one of our design editors, Josh Renaud, he lives in Ferguson, and you know, he would work the nights, and he'd see these pictures coming in literally from his neighborhood. So we have a very, very close connection, and we knew a lot of people out there. So, you know, we had that advantage.
I use social media a lot to build these connections. My first word of Ferguson came through someone who I followed on Twitter, and I had begun following him about 18 months before Ferguson because he was having an interesting interaction with a local politician. He then spent the next 17 months flirting with women on Twitter. I almost unfollowed him a number of times, but I kind of kept following him because he was in an area of the city that I didn't have a lot of contacts in. And he was actually the first person who contacted me. I was doing back-to-school shopping with my daughter and my wife at Target when I first heard about Ferguson. And it was how I first heard about it was through social media, which is funny because Ferguson was such an event that happened on social media. So.
And as you said, your photographs got distributed to social media and took on lives of their own.
Right.
But what is it like to be covering your own city that is torn apart? I mean, were you, you know, how do you manage to keep, you know, to rein in your own emotions in your own, or do you rein in your own emotions in your own?
I think most photographers are very adept at hiding behind a camera, and we're behind a camera sometimes for a good reason, and that is our mask. But when you know, you're working on adrenaline, you're trying to cover your story, but eventually, you know, you are home and you're you're looking at some of this, and it kind of sinks in then. I think every night in the first 6 weeks, we just had amazing coverage on our front page, whether it's images or stories or whatever it was, that as a resident just shocked me. It's like I couldn't, when you thought it got bad, and you thought maybe it was getting a little bit better, and it just got bad again. And it is difficult to see it.
Well, one of the unique things too was that a lot of times when you're covering a big photo story, you're doing it out of your own home area, and it was weird to come home from having been tear gassed and pepper sprayed and chased and assaulted, and had guns pointed at you by police and guns pointed at you by protesters, and you'd come home and you'd have to cut the grass and take your daughter to school. And so balancing all these events that were going on at night in Ferguson with sort of the everyday mundane things that you have to do, that was like one of the challenges. There was one night when I came home, I'd been too close to some protesters, and I'd caught a big spray of pepper spray in the face and on my clothes. And when I came home, my daughter came running up to hug me. I was like, stay away. Let me get changed out. And so that was interesting, like when you're bringing that home.
Was it difficult being a white photographer in
That
those
became an
areas?
issue. That first night when I made this picture, I was definitely the only white guy around. I guess Robert was across the street.
That was across the street.
Yeah.
You're the only two white guys there.
Yeah. I've been able to make relationships with people, black, white, irregardless of race, and that became an important thing to do, was to know people on the ground out there. There were times when you needed someone out there to vouch for you and be like, no, he's cool. And I can think of 2 or 3 times specifically where I would have been very worried for my own safety if I didn't have some other people out there to vouch for us.
Yeah, that became more of an issue as time went on, actually. It wasn't really, at least for me, it wasn't an initial issue. In the first couple of weeks it wasn't, at least, but it became an issue. And as as protesters started targeting media a little bit more, I saw several situations, at least 3 that I remember, where I actually physically saw, if protesters saw a storyline on the news that they didn't approve of, or they didn't appreciate, or whatever their perspective was, I saw them literally shut down live shots of television stations, and they would go up to CNN, or they'd go up to whoever, or local stations, and say, you're either leaving or we're helping you leave, and you're not going to do your live shot here.
Never happened to the Post-Dispatch.
Never happened to us, but I mean, we were threatened, and we had our folks assaulted, and we had similar problems.
Yeah, I mean, it was personal safety was a constant thing you had to take into account. You had to be aware of not only where the police were, but what your exit plans were going to be, and what neighborhood would be, good to go through. Where strategically, where were you going to park your car ahead of time to get out of there, and then where was Robert going to park his car in case I couldn't get to my car, so I could get to his car and we could meet up. We would work in teams a lot.
We had several nights we lost cars out there. We didn't. I mean, they weren't set on fire. We could not physically get to them anymore. The way the police lines were set up, and we'd leave the car, and then in the morning we'd usually do an early morning run at 6 a.m. We're driving out there to try to retrieve our car, and it was always there and it was always safe.
So knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? What would you do differently in the future?
I think we've talked a lot about getting into neighborhoods more and seeing how people, live their lives while this is going on around them. One of our photographers, Lars Scrivan, did a lot of that.
I mean, before the crisis, before the riots happened.
No, I mean during.
During. Yeah.
During, yeah. How are people living their lives in the midst of this? I talked about a picture earlier today that Laurie had shot of people, the way the protests were set up, it was sometimes, it's kind of hard to get out and go to the grocery store. And so, there's this wonderful picture of these people who live in one of the apartment buildings, and they're using their baby stroller as a grocery cart, and they're bringing their stuff home. And it's like, I wish we would have done a little bit more of seeing how people are living.
Of ordinary life.
Exactly.
During
in
that
the
period.
middle of all this,
Yeah.
because every day was, in some ways, it was a Groundhog Day. I mean, you know, at daylight, the streets were packed with people, and you saw the protests, and you saw families. As night fell, a lot of the families started disappearing, and that's when things got a little more violent, and usually the evening ended with tear gas, but not always.
I'd like to invite our audience to ask questions. There's a microphone in the hall. Yes, Devansh?
Yeah, I have two questions. First of all, did you ever ask anybody for permission before taking a photo? Like in this photo, for instance, I mean, not just this photo, but in anything in a similar situation, do you ask for permission before taking a shot? And secondly, if their face was uncovered in this photo, or you take a photograph of someone looting a store and you could get into trouble for that or arrested, would you not run that photo, delete the photo, blur it? I mean, how do you manage that?
Well, we wouldn't blur a photograph because that would be altering reality. In this particular case, there was a nonverbal thing. Even though he has just threatened me with a gun, I looked him in the face, and he saw I had a camera, and I mean, he has direct eye contact with me here through the camera, so he's not unaware of what's happening. As a photographer, I think most of what we do happens on a nonverbal level. They see you standing there with a camera, they know what you're doing. There are times when people are unaware that their picture is being made. As far as if his face was showing and we wouldn't run the photo because of that, you know, our job is to document reality. You know, we do our best job, you know, to do that. So, what do you think? Would you?
Yeah, we did run into. I mean, to answer the first part of your question is I generally, especially in an active scene like this, I'm not going to interrupt the action to ask permission. I'm going to go ahead and photograph what's going on, but then I'm going to try to get their names later. And sometimes, you know, it was interesting out there, and I don't know, it's not that different than other places. Some people were fine giving me their names. Some people did not want their names used, but were fine with their photograph. And it's a personal, you know, personal decision on their part. And I did have a couple instances that got a little hairy with protesters demanding that photographs were deleted after I shot them. And I worked through that, and depending on how much time we have, it's kind of a long story, but yeah, I mean, I like to make people aware of what we're doing and who we are, and I do like to, in some ways, get permission when it's possible.
Hello, thanks for joining us. So Ferguson itself was received a lot of negative media coverage. Right? So I want to know how did you, being in the scene at the time, witness it for yourself? How did that change your own personal perspectives? And do you feel like the photos that you took, were they able to somehow change this discourse that was associated with Ferguson?
Definitely got people talking. I mean, the photographs that we shot were, you know, seen worldwide, and it definitely started the conversation. I think up until Ferguson, with some exception, race is not an issue that's talked about in St. Louis, and had not been. St. Louis is one of the few cities where there were not active riots after Martin Luther King was killed in 1968, and my previous job was in the Commercial Appeal in Memphis, and our front page every day had a story about race when I was there. And I felt that on some level that St. Louis had gotten, you know, above that topic, and then everybody was fine. And in fact, it's a topic that just simmered for decades, and certainly showed itself. In terms of balance, of trying to, you know, show both sides, and it's our job to document reality, what's happening, but it's also our job to show as many sides as we can and to have different perspectives. I think, if you look at our newspaper as a whole, visuals as well as the stories we told, written and otherwise, I think we gave a lot of balance, and we were very aware of what we were doing and the way it might be viewed.
You also saw a lot of tussling over the narrative between both the police. The police had their narrative that they wanted to get out on social media. The protesters had their narrative. And so social media is really interesting now because it gives people the chance to create their own narratives. And part of our jobs as journalists has been to sort through those competing narratives to find what the actual truth is.
Yes, please.
I have a question. In listening to you and seeing these photos in the paper and seeing them here, my first question is, was there any training while you were in school to prep you for a situation like this? Is there any training in the journalism field to get you ready for something like this? Is it something that you decide on your own to go and take on something like this and stand, on the battlefield? I know you, David, have actually been off to the wars and everything, but I'm curious about, as a young journalist, how do you make the decision to walk into that, quickie mark or whatever and decide, I'm going to take this photo? Is there training for that, or is that just a gut thing that you do?
I think it was done off my gut. I first said I wanted to get closer to the quick trip, and so I walked across the street and stood outside the door and made pictures there for about 2 minutes. I quickly built a relationship with a guy there. There's the guy I talked to there, I talked to a couple months ago. He actually has pictures and video of me like in the quick trip and working. It was fascinating to see. But I quickly built that relationship with him and asked him to watch my back. When I went in, I didn't know it at the time, but when I was talking to him there just a couple months ago, he goes, "Oh yeah, I had a gun with me." He goes, I was watching your back," and I was like, so I think that the most basic thing is to quickly build relationships and earn people's trust, and you practice that every day as a photographer. And in this particular case, it's just there's heightened emotions and going on, and there are some safety concerns. You have to balance those very quickly. I balance that by not exposing myself to it for too long a period and getting in and getting out.
I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
For school, I'm sorry, was there anything in any of your training that prepares you for something like this?
I think it's just working. I just think you have to get out in the field and work and practice building those relationships, because I don't think sitting in a classroom and having someone tell you about how to build a relationship helps you do it. I think that's one of those things you have to get out there and practice.
Yeah, I think what David mentioned about earlier, kind of getting in and out of situations quickly. I mean, we're on the streets every day and we're meeting people, but we also get the vibe of the people we're talking to and the people we're meeting, and we know when we're fine to hang for a while, but we also know when, okay, this is getting dicey, let's go in, get what we hope to get or what we need to get, and get right out.